John Thorne had spent 20 years tending to that farm as if it were his own. Every fence, every greenhouse, every patch of soil bore the mark of his calloused hands. But on that stormy afternoon, when he came across a woman lost on the dirt road, with her car stuck in the mud and her ankle twisted, he had no idea that this simple act of helping a stranger would turn his life upside down. He certainly didn't imagine who she really was. And when the bosses found out he had given shelter to that unknown woman, the humiliation John suffered in front of all the workers was just the beginning of a story no one expected. John Thorne was 38 years old and the longest-serving caretaker on the Whitaker farm. A man of few words, steady hands, and a quiet way of existing. He lived in a simple little house on the property, and every dawn was the same. He woke early, brewed a strong black coffee, put on the same worn work shirt, and headed out to tend to the land. For John, that farm wasn't just a workplace. It was home, responsibility, and refuge. Every barn, every fence, every greenhouse there carried the marks of his manual labor over nearly 2 decades. Mr. Harlan, the old farm owner, had always treated him with respect. The two had a silent bond of trust, built day by day without many words but with firm gestures. When Mr. Harlan died 3 months ago, it was as if a part of the land had died with him. John felt the emptiness, but he didn't stop. He kept caring for the farm, the trees, the animals, every structure, as if the old man were still there watching. In John's heart, there was an unspoken promise to keep alive what Mr. Harlan had built. But the old man's death brought changes John hadn't expected. Harlan's distant family, his nephews, took over the management of the property. They were young, city folks, hurried and arrogant. They had never set foot on that land before, but they arrived talking about optimizing assets and selling while the market was hot. To them, John was just an old cog in a machine that would soon be dismantled, an irrelevant detail in a much bigger deal. John carried with him an object that meant more than any paycheck, an old pocket watch, worn metal from years of use, that Mr. Harlan had given him on his deathbed. The old man held John's hand with the little strength he had left and said only one thing: "Take care of her when she arrives. You'll know when the time comes." John didn't fully understand what it meant, but he kept the watch and held on to the words like a sacred vow. On a Saturday afternoon, John went to the small cemetery in Willow Creek where Mr. Harlan was buried. He brought simple wildflowers. He knelt in front of the stone marker and arranged the flowers carefully. He looked at the engraved name and whispered softly, "You said she would come. I believed you." He didn't expect a reply. He just felt he needed to say it out loud, as if the old man could still hear him from somewhere. It was in this setting of quiet mourning and uncertainty that, on a particularly humid afternoon, John encountered a woman on the dirt road leading to the farm. The sky was heavy, with dark clouds gathering on the horizon. It had rained hard earlier, and the road was full of puddles and mud. John was driving his old pickup truck back to the property when he saw, right in the middle of the path, a fancy luxury car pulled over, half stuck in the muck. A woman was trying to push the vehicle by herself, but the more she pushed, the deeper the car sank. She wore expensive clothes, but they were splattered with mud. Her face was tense, her hair stuck to her forehead with sweat, and her expression was that of someone at the end of their rope. John pulled the truck to a stop a few yards away and got out slowly. The woman, noticing his presence, turned around startled. "Ma'am, you're just going to hurt yourself worse like that," John said, walking toward her calmly. The woman gave one more desperate shove at the car, but as she pushed, her foot slipped in the mud and she fell sideways onto the roadside. She let out a muffled cry of pain. John hurried to her and saw her clutching her ankle, her face contorted. "Let me take a look," he said, crouching beside her. But the woman pulled back, suspicious. She looked at John with a mix of fear and irritation. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice trembling. "And what do you want in return for helping me?" John stopped where he was. He wasn't offended. He just looked at her with that calm he had always carried and replied slowly, "Ma'am, if I wanted something, I wouldn't have been here for 20 years without asking anyone for a thing." The woman blinked, surprised by the response. She lowered her eyes, ashamed of her own distrust. John extended his hand again, and this time she took it. He helped her up carefully and noticed she could barely put weight on her foot. The ankle was already starting to swell. "I'll take you back to the farm. There's water, ice, and you can wait out this storm." I'll sort out your car later." Without waiting for a reply, John carried her in his arms to the truck. The woman was tense at first, but she realized she had no choice. John settled her in the passenger seat, grabbed some tools from the bed, and went back to her car. He worked quickly, cleared the engine, checked what he could, and towed the vehicle to a safer spot, protected from the puddles. All this while, the first drops of the new storm began to fall. When he returned to the truck, the woman was looking out the window with a different expression. It wasn't suspicion anymore. It was something close to genuine surprise. John got in, wiped his grease-stained hands on an old rag, and started the engine. "What's your name?" he asked, keeping his eyes on the road. "Clara," she replied softly. "My name is Clara." John nodded, but he didn't ask anything else. He took Clara to one of the old barns on the farm, a dry place sheltered from the rain that was now pouring hard. He set up an improvised bench for her to sit on, brought fresh water in a glass, and prepared an ice pack for her swollen ankle. He did everything in silence, with practical, careful movements. Clara watched every gesture. There was something in the simplicity of that man that completely disarmed her. No one had helped her like that in a long time. Without interest, without ulterior motives, just helping because it was the right thing to do. What Clara didn't say, and what John didn't know, was that she wasn't just any stranger. Clara Whitaker was, in fact, Mr. Harlan's granddaughter. Daughter of one of the sons the old man never publicly acknowledged, from a relationship the family had always wanted to hide. For years, Clara had exchanged secret letters with her grandfather. Long letters, full of talks about the land, the history of the farm, and about a man Mr. Harlan called the Silent Guardian. The grandfather wrote about John with a respect Clara rarely saw for anyone else. In the last letter she received before Mr. Harlan's death, he wrote something that stayed etched in Clara's memory. "If one day I'm no longer here, go there. See it with your own eyes. But don't announce yourself, or you won't see the truth." Clara followed the request to the letter. She arrived disguised, using only her first name, determined to understand what was really happening on that farm, and how the people working there were being treated. But there was another reason for Clara being there. She was coming from a deep emotional burnout, severe exhaustion, anxiety attacks that left her breathless, a chronic loneliness that no therapy seemed to fix. City life was crushing her in a way she could no longer bear. The trip to the farm was also a desperate escape. And there, in that old barn, while the rain hammered on the tin roof and John prepared an ice pack for her ankle, Clara felt something she hadn't felt in years. A strange, almost forgotten peace. John broke the silence. "Storm will pass soon. Then I'll take you to town if you want." Clara shook her head. "No need. Can I stay around here until my car is ready to go again?" John looked at her thoughtfully, but nodded. "There's a little room in the back of the main house. Simple, but dry. You can stay there as long as you need." And so, without fanfare, Clara Whitaker entered the Whitaker farm as just any stranger, while John Thorne, unaware of who she really was, had just changed the course of his own life forever. Clara spent the first night in a simple little room at the back of the main house. Iron bed, old wardrobe, window overlooking the fields. Clean, but no frills. She lay down expecting exhaustion to win, but sleep wouldn't come. The silence made her mind race. Memories of her grandfather, the lie she was living there, it all weighed on her at once. Guilt tightened her chest like an invisible hand. Her breathing faltered. Her heart raced. Cold hands trembling. It was a panic attack. Clara tried to control it, but the fear only grew. She sat on the floor, hugged her knees, and started crying softly, trying to muffle the sound. But the sobs escaped in desperate gasps. John was passing by when he heard. He was coming back from checking the barns and caught the muffled sound. He stopped. He hesitated whether to knock or keep going, but something in that crying made him stay. He knocked lightly. "Ma'am, everything okay in there?" Silence. Clara couldn't respond. John opened the door slowly and saw her sitting on the floor, trembling, face wet. He didn't ask anything. He just entered and sat beside her, keeping a respectful distance. "Listen here," John said with a calm voice. "You're gonna breathe with me. Slow. In through the nose, hold, out through the mouth." Clara tried to follow. John continued, patient, like taming a skittish animal. Again, in, hold, out. Little by little, Clara's breathing steadied. John stayed there, in no hurry, no judgment. When she finally breathed right, he spoke softly. Land doesn't lie. People do. Land, no. Clara looked at him without understanding. John went on. When it gets tight, I look at the land. It's always there, steady. Doesn't ask for anything, doesn't judge, just stays. Clara felt something settle inside her. A presence that demanded nothing, just existed. That night, an invisible bridge formed between the two. The next day, Clara woke calmer. She found John in the yard fixing a fence. He greeted her with a nod, as if the crisis from the night before had never happened. Clara began observing the farm's routine. That's when she saw how Mr. Harlan's nephews treated John. They arrived early in the morning in an imported SUV, talking loud, giving orders. They treated the workers like disposable parts. But with John, it was different. It was personal. At lunch, everyone ate together in an adapted barn. John was at a corner table, eating his simple packed lunch. One of the nephews, Ronan, walked in with a mocking grin. He strode over to John, snatched the lunch from his hand, and threw it on the ground. Eat there, old man. A dog's place is on the floor. Silence fell over the barn. Clara, watching from afar, felt her stomach turn. John didn't react. He just looked at the spilled food, sighed, bent down, and picked up the dirty container. He wiped it with an old rag from his pocket and went back to eating. Ronan laughed loudly and left. Clara saw discreet tears in the eyes of the older workers, but no one said anything. John kept eating, and Clara realized this was routine. Later, Clara overheard the nephews talking. They were in the office. She passed by the open window. Ronan and his sister Petra were discussing the sale. The buyers confirmed. Tomorrow at 9 a.m. they arrive. At 9:01, this place is no longer our problem, Ronan said. Petra added, and that guy John? Fire him today. I don't want anyone getting sentimental when we close the deal. Clara felt her blood run cold. Less than 18 hours left. That afternoon, Clara kept observing. John was the only one really keeping the farm running. He fixed machines, cared for the animals, guided the workers. Without him, the place would fall apart. But to the nephews, he was just a nuisance. A worker named Miles approached her. Ma'am, he said softly, John's been eating once a day for months. He saves everything to send to his nephew studying in the city. Engineering school. The kid doesn't know a thing. Clara felt her chest tighten. John was going hungry to support someone else's dream. Later, Clara went looking for John. She found him in the greenhouse, watering seedlings that Mr. Harlan had tended with care. She was direct. Miles told me you've been eating once a day. Why didn't you say anything? John stopped watering the plants and looked at her with a closed expression. That's none of your business, he replied curtly. He turned his back and continued working. Clara insisted, You don't have to do this alone, let me help. John set down the watering can, turned to her with hard eyes. Ma'am, I didn't ask for help. Didn't ask for pity, and I don't need anyone sticking their nose in my life. Everyone takes care of their own. Clara backed off, surprised by the sharpness. She realized she had crossed a line. John was proud. He accepted helping others but not being helped. She apologized softly and left the greenhouse, leaving him alone with the plants. But the image of John protecting the seedlings with such care, while he himself wasted away, stayed etched in her mind. Night fell over the farm. Clara couldn't sleep. She knew time was running out. Tomorrow morning everything would be sold. John would be thrown out. The farm would become just another deal in the hands of investors who would never set foot on that land. And she was there, hiding, doing nothing. Meanwhile, on the other side of the property, John wasn't sleeping either. He had overheard the nephew's conversation earlier. He knew the sale was set. He knew his time there was ending. And he knew he carried something that could change everything. Mr. Harlan's letter. Kept inside a rusty metal box under the bed in his little house was the handwritten page the old man had given him months before dying. In it, Mr. Harlan declared that Clara, his granddaughter, should inherit the farm. It wasn't notarized, but it was written in the old man's shaky hand, signed and dated. It was a fragile document, but it was all John had. He took the letter, held it to the dim light of the lantern and reread the words he already knew by heart. I trust Clara. She has the right heart. And if John is still there, he'll know when to hand this over. John closed his eyes. He knew delivering that letter meant exposing himself. The nephews could accuse him of trespassing, manipulation, anything. He could lose his job on the spot. He could be thrown out without his back pay. He could even end up in jail. And if that happened, his nephew would have to drop out of college. All of John's sacrifice would be for nothing. He looked at the letter again. He thought about throwing it away, burning it, pretending it never existed. It would be easier, safer. But then he remembered Mr. Harlan's look on his deathbed. He remembered the trust the old man had placed in him, and he remembered Clara, the woman he helped on the road, the same one Mr. Harlan mentioned in old letters as the girl with the clean heart. John put the letter back in the box. He still didn't know what to do, but he knew time was running out. The early morning hours arrived heavy over the farm. John hadn't slept a wink. He sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the metal box holding Mr. Harlan's letter. The pocket watch on the bedside table read 4:30 a.m. Less than 5 hours until the buyers arrived. Less than 5 hours until it all ended. John got up, splashed cold water on his face, and put on his work shirt. He knew he needed to make a decision. But every time he thought about handing over that letter, he remembered his nephew studying in the city. He remembered the months scrimping every penny. He remembered that if he lost his job now, he wouldn't have money to send next month. And without money, the boy would have to drop out of college. But then John looked out the window and saw the greenhouse in the distance. The seedlings Mr. Harlan had planted with such care. The land the old man loved more than anything. And he thought of Clara, the woman with tired eyes who had the same habit as Mr. Harlan of rubbing her chin when thinking. John wasn't a fool. From the first day, he had suspected who she really was. He took the letter from the box, tucked it into his shirt pocket, and left the little house. The sun hadn't risen yet, but he needed to do something before it was too late. As he walked toward the greenhouse, John heard voices from one of the barns. It was the nephews. He approached slowly and hid behind a stack of old lumber. Ronan and Petra were talking with two people John didn't know. Investors, probably. Everything's set for 9, Ronan was saying. The deed's ready, just needs signing. You come in, we go out, and this headache is off our hands. One of the investors asked about the workers. Petra laughed. Fire everyone. These folks are old, slow. You'll want new people, more productive. Ronan added, There's a caretaker here, John something. He's the first to go. Keep an eye on him. Likes to poke his nose where it doesn't belong. John felt his blood boil, but he didn't move. He kept listening. That's when he saw something that made his stomach churn. The nephews were carrying boxes from the office to the trunk of a car. Boxes full of papers, documents, old photos. And among them, John recognized Mr. Harlan's old journal. They were taking away everything of sentimental value, everything that told the farm's story. But the worst came after. Ronan stopped near the greenhouse, looked at the seedlings Mr. Harlan had cared for so much, and called over one of the younger workers. Uproot all that stuff. I need the space to park the buyers' cars. The young man hesitated. But Mr. Ronan, those plants were Mr. Harlan's. Ronan cut him off. I didn't ask for the plant's history. I asked if you're gonna uproot them or if I find someone else to do it. John couldn't take it. He stepped out from behind the lumber stack and walked straight up to Ronan. Don't touch those seedlings. Ronan turned to him with a mocking smile. Look who decided to show up. The farm guardian. John didn't look away. Mr. Harlan planted every one of those seedlings with his own hands. You're not destroying that. Ronan stepped forward, invading John's space. You don't call the shots here, old man. In fact, you shouldn't even be here. You're fired. Get your things and get off my property before I call the cops. John didn't budge. Ronan signaled to 2 security guards nearby. Get him out of here. The men advanced, but John still tried to resist. He shielded the seedlings with his own body, placing himself in front of the greenhouse. That's when Ronan lost patience. He gave John a hard shove and John lost his balance, falling flat on his back in the dirt. The fall was bad. John hit hard, felt the sharp pain in his back, but he didn't groan. He just lay there on the ground, looking up at the sky starting to lighten. The guards hauled him up by force and dragged him away from the greenhouse. John watched, helpless as the young worker began uprooting the seedlings one by one with tears in his eyes. But before being taken away, John managed to protect one thing. In the moment of the fall, he gripped Mr. Harlan's letter in his shirt pocket tightly. He pressed it to his chest so hard the paper nearly tore. That was all that was left, and he wasn't letting them take it. The guards released John near the gate. He got up slowly, brushed the dirt from his clothes, and looked back. He saw the nephews laughing, saw the greenhouse being destroyed, saw the farm he loved being taken apart piece by piece, and he made his decision. John walked straight to the main house. He knocked on the door of Clara's little room with determination. She opened it, still sleepy, and gasped at the sight of him. "John, what happened? You're hurt." He entered the room without asking, closed the door behind him, and pulled out the letter. "Your grandfather asked me for one thing, and I ain't good for nothing if I don't keep my word." He extended the letter to Clara with steady hands, even though he was shaking inside. Clara took the paper, still confused, and began to read. Her eyes widened. Her hands trembled. She read it once, twice, as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. This is his handwriting," Clara whispered. "It's my grandfather's handwriting." She looked at John with tears starting to form. "You knew? All this time? You knew who I was?" John shook his head slowly. "I wasn't sure. But the way you rub your chin when you're thinking, it's just like his. And the way you look at the land, like you're missing something you never knew. Mr. Harlan wrote about you in his letters. He left this with me and said I'd know when to give it." Clara held the letter to her chest and closed her eyes. "Why did you keep it so long without saying anything?" John looked at her with that raw honesty only he had. "I wasn't sure if you were really her. And even if you were, I wasn't sure you deserved to know. I had to be certain your heart was like Mr. Harlan said. Now I know." Clara opened her eyes and saw John for the first time truly. She saw the man who went hungry to care for someone else's dream. The man who was humiliated and still stood tall. The man who protected that letter even at the risk of losing everything. And she understood why her grandfather trusted him so much. "John, do you know what this means?" Clara asked, holding the letter. "It means you've just given me the weapon to take them down. But it also means you're going to pay dearly for it." John shrugged. "I've already paid. They kicked me out half an hour ago, destroyed the greenhouse. They're going to sell the farm soon. I got nothing left to lose." Clara looked at the clock on the wall. 6:40 a.m., a little over 2 hours left. She needed to act fast. "Do you trust me?" she asked. John nodded. "Then stay here. Don't leave this room until I come back. Promise?" John promised. Clara left the room clutching the letter like it was the most precious thing in the world. And in a way, it was. As she hurried to make calls, gather evidence, and prepare what she needed, John sat on the edge of the bed, looking out the window. He saw the nephews continue destroying the greenhouse. He saw the investors arrive early, eager to close the deal. He saw the farm he loved being prepared to be handed over to strangers. But this time, John didn't feel helpless. For the first time in months, he felt he had done the right thing. He had kept the promise he made to Mr. Harlan, and now, all he could do was wait and trust that Clara knew what she was doing. He rubbed his chin thoughtfully and whispered softly, looking at the sky through the window. Just like him. The next few hours passed slowly for John. He stayed in the room as promised, watching out the window as activity on the farm increased. More cars arrived. More strangers milled about the place he called home. Mr. Harlan's pocket watch read 8:30 a.m., 30 minutes until the sale went through. That's when John heard the noise. Shouts coming from the central yard. He stood up and looked out the window. All the workers were being called. Ronan was in the middle of the yard barking orders. "I want everyone here now. All employees, no exceptions." John felt his stomach knot. He knew this wasn't good. But he had promised Clara he'd stay hidden. He stayed there, watching from afar as the workers gathered. Miles was there. The older ones, the younger ones, all silent. Fear etched on their faces. Ronan waited until everyone was assembled. Then he pointed toward the room where John was. "There's a man hiding in that house, John Thorne. Some of you must know him." Total silence. Ronan continued. This man betrayed this family's trust. He sheltered a stranger on the property without permission, rifled through confidential documents, and now he's trying to sabotage the sale of this farm. Murmurs started among the workers. Some looked at the ground. Others exchanged worried glances. Ronan signaled to the guards. "Bring him here. Now." John saw the men approaching the house. He knew resistance was pointless. He opened the door before they could break it down and stepped out with his head high. The guards grabbed him by the arms and dragged him to the yard, throwing him into the middle of the circle of workers. John fell to his knees in the packed dirt. Ronan approached slowly, savoring the moment. "Look here. This is the man you all respect so much, the farm guardian." He spat the word with contempt. But what is he really? A traitor, a manipulator, someone who uses others' trust for his own gain. John stayed on his knees, said nothing. Ronan signaled to one of the guards. "Bring his belongings. I want to search everything in front of everyone." The men went into John's little house and returned with his old backpack, some clothes, tools. They dumped it all on the ground, right in the middle of the yard. The workers watched in silence, horrified. Clara, hidden behind one of the barns, bit her lip, trying not to scream. She wanted to run out there, but she knew it wasn't time yet. Ronan started kicking through John's belongings, scattering everything in the dirt. Old shirts, a beat-up notebook, rusted tools. "This is all you have after 20 years? Pathetic." He grabbed the backpack and turned it upside down. Some coins fell out, a bar of soap, an old photo. That's when Ronan spotted the pocket watch. He bent down, picked it up, and examined it closely. "Well, look at this. A family heirloom." He turned to John with a cruel smile. "This here's Whitaker inheritance. Belongs to this family, not you." John finally spoke, his voice low but firm. "Mr. Harlan gave it to me, his hand in mine. On his deathbed." Ronan laughed loudly. "And you think that gives you any rights? Think a gift makes you family?" He pocketed the watch. "This stays with me." John stood up slowly. The guard stepped forward, but he didn't try to attack. He just looked Ronan in the eye and said, "You can keep the watch, keep the farm, keep it all, but you can't take from me what Mr. Harlan really gave me. Respect, trust, and the knowledge I did right." Ronan's smile faded. Anger rose in his face. He pulled out the copy of the letter John had kept, the one from the backpack, and held it high for all to see. "This is proof of his betrayal. A fake letter forged, trying to convince a stranger she has claim to this property." With a theatrical flourish, Ronan tore the letter into tiny pieces and let the shreds fall to the ground like confetti. "That's what I do with lies." He turned to John. 20 years here and you're nothing but a hanger-on who doesn't know his place." The words cut deep, not to John, but to the workers watching. Miles bowed his head, wiping away discreet tears. An older woman brought a hand to her mouth, sobbing softly. They knew, everyone knew who John really was. Ronan signaled to the guards, "Get this man off my property. If he comes back, call the cops." The men grabbed John again. He didn't resist. He just started gathering his scattered belongings from the ground with slow, dignified movements. But as he bent to pick up an old shirt, one of the younger workers, a guy named Derek, stepped forward. "I'll help, Mr. John." Ronan whirled around, furious. "You stay put." Derek stopped but didn't back down. Miles stepped forward too. Then another worker, and another. In seconds, half the men there were helping John collect his things. In silence, with tears in their eyes, but helping. Ronan shouted, "Anyone who helps him is fired." No one stopped. They kept gathering John's stuff, placing it carefully in the backpack like treasures. John looked at those men, many who'd worked with him for years, and felt his chest tighten. Not with sadness, but with something like gratitude. Even with nothing to offer, even broken, he still had that. The respect of those men. When everything was packed, John slung the backpack over his shoulder. He looked one last time at the farm, at the barns he'd fixed, at the fences he'd built, at the land he'd loved like his own. Then he looked at the workers and nodded, a silent thank you. He walked toward the gate without looking back. Ronan yelled after him, "And don't come back. If you show up again, I'll sue you for trespassing." John didn't reply. He just kept walking, each step heavy but firm. He passed through the gate and left the Whitaker farm. For the first time in 20 years, he was on the outside. No home, no job, no back pay. He carried only the clothes on his back, an old backpack, and the certainty that he had done the right thing. As John walked away down the dirt road, Clara watched everything from her hiding spot. Tears ran down her face, but they weren't from despair. They were from anger. A cold, calculated anger that turned fear into determination. She looked at her watch. 8:55 a.m. 5 minutes until the sale. But Clara had other plans. She took out her phone, made one last call, and said just 3 words. Come now. In less than 2 minutes, 2 cars pulled into the farm. One carried Clara's lawyers. The other brought a process server. Ronan and Petra, who had been celebrating John's departure, froze at the sight of the vehicles. Clara stepped out from behind the barn and walked to the center of the yard, exactly where John had been humiliated minutes before. But now she was different, dressed in simple elegance, posture straight, gaze steady. The lawyers positioned themselves beside her. Ronan tried to smile, but it didn't come out right. Sorry, miss, but this is private property, unless you're one of the buyers. Clara cut him off with a clear voice loud enough for all the workers to hear. My name is Clara Whitaker. I'm Harlan Whitaker's granddaughter, and the rightful heir to this farm. The silence was absolute. Ronan and Petra exchanged panicked looks. The workers glanced at each other, confused. The investors took a step back, sensing something was very wrong. Clara held out her hand, and one of the lawyers placed Mr. Harlan's original letter in it, the same one John had safeguarded for months. This is a handwritten declaration from my grandfather, signed and dated 3 months before his death. In it, he clearly states his wish for me to inherit this property. Ronan tried to laugh, but his voice shook. That has no legal weight, it's just an old piece of paper. Clara's lawyer stepped forward. Actually, it does. Especially when backed by handwriting analysis, witness recognition, and documentation proving my client's relation. Petra made one last play. This is ridiculous. Our uncle never mentioned any granddaughter. She's an imposter. Clara looked at her coldly. My grandfather never mentioned it because you never bothered to ask. He exchanged letters with me for years. I have them all saved, all in the same handwriting as this declaration. Clara walked slowly through the yard, making a point to look at each worker present. What you did to John was cowardly. He was always the living root of this place, the only one who truly cared about what Mr. Harlan built. Her voice grew harder, sharper. If he doesn't come back, none of you stay. Miles, the oldest worker, stepped forward. The lady's right. John's more the owner of this land than any of you lot. Other workers nodded in agreement. Ronan's face drained of color. But Clara wasn't done. She looked straight at Ronan. And there's more. My grandfather wrote in this letter that he trusted John to care for me and this farm. That he was the guardian who knew every inch of this land better than anyone. You destroyed the greenhouse my grandfather loved, humiliated the man he respected, and you were about to sell everything for greed. Clara's lawyer opened a folder and handed documents to the process server. We're filing for an injunction to halt any transaction involving this property until the inheritance issue is resolved in court. The server stamped the papers and turned to the investors. Gentlemen, I'm sorry to inform you, but this sale cannot proceed. The investors didn't waste time. They packed their folders, muttered something about suing for damages, and left the farm in under 5 minutes. Ronan and Petra stood there paralyzed, watching it all crumble. Clara seemed to have won. The workers began applauding quietly. Some hugged each other, relieved. But then the nephew's lawyer, a man in an expensive suit who had stayed silent until now, approached. With all due respect, he said to Clara's lawyer, a letter without notarization has no testamentary value. This goes to court and could take months, maybe years. In the meantime, my clients remain the legal administrators of the property. The smile returned to Ronan's face. Hear that, sweetheart? You may have Grandpa's note, but the farm's still ours. And you know what we're going to do now? Sue everyone. Starting with that, John, for trespassing and manipulation. Petra added, and while the case drags on, we'll do whatever we want here, including selling, if we find another buyer. Clara felt the ground slip away. She had the letter, the proof, but the legal process would take time. And during that time, the nephews could destroy everything. She looked at her lawyer, who grimaced, confirming it was true. The nephew's lawyer continued. By the way, we're filing a legal notice against John Thorne for emotionally influencing the heir in question to gain personal advantage. Classic case of effective manipulation for financial ends. Clara felt rage boiling. That's a lie. John never… Ronan interrupted, laughing. Doesn't matter if it's a lie or truth, sweetheart. What matters is we'll make his life hell. And you can't do a thing while we tie this up in court. Clara left the farm without another word. She got in the car with the lawyers, hands shaking with anger and frustration. She had thought presenting the letter would be enough. That truth would win quickly, but reality was crueler. The nephews had resources, expensive lawyers, and would exploit every legal loophole to hold on. 2 days passed. Clara stayed at a hotel in the nearby town, gathering more documents, talking to lawyers, trying to find a legal angle. But every door that opened revealed more hurdles. The process would be long, and in the meantime, the farm would stay in the nephew's hands. It was one of those nights that she got a call from Miles. Miss Clara, you need to know. The nephews. They reported Mr. John to the police, said he was manipulating you. The cops went after him in town. Clara dropped the phone. She grabbed her car keys, but the lawyers held her back. Clara, going there now could make it worse. It might look like there's really something between you, strengthening their accusation. She pushed them away. I don't care. They arrested an innocent man because of me. Clara drove like mad to the Willow Creek police station. When she arrived, she saw John getting out of a squad car, handcuffed, being led inside. His face was tired, but he kept that same calm expression. When he saw Clara getting out of her car, he just shook his head as if to say, "Don't get involved." But Clara ignored the silent warning. She followed him into the station. She heard the charge being read. Emotionally influencing a person in a vulnerable position to gain advantage in inheritance matters. A vague accusation, but enough to hold John at least overnight. Clara tried talking to the sheriff, but he was firm. Miss, there's a formal complaint here I have to investigate. He spends the night and gives a statement tomorrow. Clara begged. He didn't do anything. I asked for the letter. I went to him. The sheriff sighed. That's exactly why the complaint exists. Look, go home, we'll sort it tomorrow. Clara sat outside the station all night. She couldn't leave knowing John was in there, locked up, because of something she had caused. In the early hours, she leaned her head against the cold car window and cried silently. Inside the station, John was in a small cell. It wasn't the first time he'd slept in tight quarters, so he didn't complain. But what bothered him was the injustice. He had done the right thing. He delivered the letter because it was Mr. Harlan's request. And now he was being treated like a criminal. That's when he heard Ronan's voice from the other side of the bars. So, John? Comfy in there? The nephew had come to the station himself with another suited man. Ronan approached the bars, a thick envelope in hand. Came to make you an offer. A generous one, given your situation. He tossed the envelope onto the cell floor. $50,000. All yours. You just sign a little paper saying Clara seduced you, that you took advantage of her emotional fragility, and that the letter was your idea to make a buck. John looked at the envelope on the floor. He didn't move. Ronan continued. Think about it, old man. 50 grand. Enough to keep your nephew in college for a long time. Enough to start fresh somewhere far from here. All you gotta do is sign. John stood slowly. He walked to the bars and looked Ronan in the eye. Then deliberately he spat on the floor right next to the envelope. You could multiply it by 1,000, still wouldn't be enough. Ronan's smile vanished. He picked up the envelope, wiped it disgustedly, and left the station without another word. John went back to his corner of the cell and closed his eyes. He had no money, no lawyer, nothing. But he had one thing no one could buy. The certainty he wouldn't sell out. Morning came slowly. Clara hadn't slept. She was still in the car parked in front of the station, waiting for dawn so she could do something. When the sun began to rise, she saw movement inside. She grabbed her phone and called the lawyer. I need to get him out. Now. The lawyer was already on the way. She arrived half an hour later with a folder full of documents. They went into the station together and asked to speak to the sheriff. It took 40 minutes of arguing, but they finally got it. The lawyer presented all the documentation proving the letter was legitimate. that the relationship between Clara and John was purely professional, and that the nephew's complaint was clearly an intimidation tactic. The sheriff sighed deeply and ordered John's release. When John came out of the cell, he saw Clara waiting outside. She stood up immediately, but he just looked at her and said softly, "Ma'am, you didn't need to put yourself out for me." Clara felt the words like a punch. She had caused all this. John was broken because of her. "John, I'm so sorry. I never imagined—" He cut her off with a hand gesture. "Wasn't your fault. You did what you had to. So did I. Now everyone goes their own way." Clara tried to reach him. "Come back to the farm with me. We'll fix this together." John stopped but didn't turn. "Spent my life caring for a place that turned its back on me at the first stumble. Don't know if I can go back." He kept walking toward the street. Clara ran after him. "John, wait!" But when she got close, he turned with an expression she'd never seen. It wasn't anger. It was deep weariness. Disillusionment. "Ma'am, I'm broken. Spent the night in a cell treated like a thief. Lost my job. Lost my home. And now I've got a false accusation staining my name. I need time." He pulled the pocket watch from his own pocket. Clara was surprised. "You still have that? I thought Ronan—" John shook his head. "Got it back while he was distracted. It's the only thing left from what Mr. Harlan gave me." He held out the watch to Clara. "If I don't come back, you keep this for me." Clara took the watch with both hands, like it was the most fragile thing in the world. "You'll come back. I know you will." John didn't reply. He just turned away and walked down the dirt street until he vanished around the bend. Clara stood there, holding the watch, feeling the weight of the object and everything it represented. The lawyer approached and put a hand on her shoulder. "Come on, we've got work to do." In the following days, Clara officially took legal command of the farm. The injunction had been granted, and now she had authority to manage the property, while the inheritance case proceeded. The nephews were forced out, but not without causing as much damage as possible first. Clara arrived at the farm and saw the state of things. The greenhouse had been completely destroyed, equipment damaged, important documents burned. It was as if Ronan and Petra had made a point to leave everything in ruins before going. But Clara didn't give up. She called all the workers to a meeting. "No one's getting fired, you all stay, we'll rebuild this together." Miles stepped forward. "And Mr. John, Miss Clara, he coming back?" Clara felt her chest tighten. "I don't know, Miles. He said he needs time." The workers exchanged worried looks. One of them said, "Without John, we don't really know how to keep things running. He knew every corner of this farm." Clara took a deep breath. "Then I'll have to learn." And she did. She spent the next days working side by side with the staff. Fixed fences, organized barns, replanted what could be replanted. Her hands got calloused. Her skin burned in the sun. But she didn't stop. It was as if every piece of land she tended connected her a little more to what her grandfather had loved so much. Clara permanently blocked the farm's sale. She restored the abandoned structures, kept all the workers employed, and even paid the back wages John had never received. But even with everything running, even with the farm coming back to life, something was missing. At night, alone in the office that had been Mr. Harlan's, Clara looked at the pocket watch John had left with her. She turned the object between her fingers, wondering where he was, if he was okay, if he'd ever return. The emptiness she felt wasn't just from missing John. It was from the injustice of it all. He had been the hero of the story, but he left with nothing. While she, who arrived lying about who she was, ended up with everything. A week passed, then two. Clara was starting to lose hope. Until one afternoon, Miles came running up to her. "Miss Clara, someone at the gate." She dropped what she was doing and ran. It was John. He stood at the farm's entrance, backpack on, tools in hand. But his expression wasn't relief or joy. It was serious, almost hard. Clara ran to him, but when she got close, John spoke first. "Heard they trashed part of the greenhouse. Someone's got to save what Mr. Harlan built." He walked right past her, heading toward where the greenhouse had been. Clara stood still, processing. He hadn't come back for her. He'd come back for the farm, for the land, for Mr. Harlan's legacy. She felt a pang of hurt but swallowed it and followed him. John worked the rest of the day in silence, assessed the damage, made notes, started planning the rebuild. Clara tried talking a few times, but he answered in monosyllables, focused only on the work. When night fell, he set up an improvised tent near the greenhouse site. He didn't go into the house. He asked for nothing. The next day, Clara woke early and went to where John was. He had already been working for hours, replanting new seedlings. She grabbed a shovel and started digging beside him without asking. They worked side by side for hours without exchanging words. That's how the following days went, working together in silence, rebuilding the greenhouse, restoring fences, tending the land. The tension between them was palpable, but neither broke the silence first. Until one afternoon, while planting a yellowwood sapling together, the same species Mr. Harlan said symbolized rebirth, Clara couldn't take it anymore. "John, I know you didn't come back for me, but I need you to know that—" He interrupted her without looking up, focused on the sapling. "I lied." Clara stopped digging. "What do you mean?" John finally looked at her. "I didn't come back just for the farm. I came back for you too. Just didn't know how to say it." The silence that followed was different. No longer tense. It was charged with something neither could name. Clara felt her eyes well up. "Why didn't you say so sooner?" John went back to the sapling. "Because I was ashamed, mad at myself. Spent 20 years caring for this place and ended up kicked out like a stray dog. Felt like a failure." Clara approached slowly. "You didn't fail. You were the only one who stayed true in all this." John looked at his dirt-stained hands. "I know, but knowing doesn't ease the hurt, ma'am." They finished planting the sapling together. When they were done, they stood there, looking at the small tree that one day would grow strong. John broke the silence. "You remember? Land doesn't lie, and it always knew we'd stay." Clara smiled for the first time in days. It wasn't a big smile, but it was real. They didn't hold hands. They didn't hug. But something between them shifted in that moment. The ice began to thaw, but the nephews hadn't given up. Even ousted from the farm, they kept spreading rumors in the area. They said John was manipulating Clara, that she was a fragile woman, emotionally unstable, and he had taken advantage. They said it was only a matter of time before she realized and sent him packing again. The rumors reached Clara's ears through Miles. She was furious. "They just won't stop, will they?" Miles shook his head. "Miss, folks in town already know it's bunk, but some people believe anything." Clara looked toward where John was working. "I won't let this shake us. Not again." That night, Clara called a meeting with all the farm workers. John was there, leaning against a wall, observing. Clara stood in the center and spoke with a firm voice. "You all saw what happened here, saw how John was treated, saw the injustice. And now there are people spreading lies, saying he's manipulating me." She looked at each face present. "I want you to know the truth. John doesn't owe me anything. I owe him. If it weren't for him, I never would have had the courage to take on this farm. And if anyone comes around spreading rumors, I want you to stand up for the truth. Not for me. For him." The workers applauded. Miles stood up. "We always knew, Miss Clara. From day one. John doesn't manipulate anyone, he just endures." Other workers agreed. John, leaning against the wall, felt something stir in his chest. It wasn't gratitude. It was something bigger. It was belonging. Weeks passed. The routine on the farm began to stabilize. Clara and John worked side by side every day, and the bond between them grew slowly, like roots deepening into the soil without haste. They didn't make declarations. They didn't force closeness. But anyone watching could see something was changing. It was in the small gestures. John arrived in the morning with coffee already brewed for both. Clara set aside the best fruit from lunch and left it on his table. When it rained hard, he checked if she had closed her room's window. When he stayed late working, she brought a jacket so he wouldn't catch cold. Nothing was said. Everything was felt. But the peace didn't last. One afternoon, Miles came running to Clara with bad news. "Miss Clara, the nephews did something awful." She dropped what she was doing. "What now?" Miles hesitated before speaking. "They trashed part of the new greenhouse. The stuff we planted with so much work." Clara felt her blood boil. She and John ran to the site and saw the damage. Several seedlings uprooted, soil turned over, and a message spray-painted on the gate. "This'll never be yours." John clenched his fists but said nothing. Clara was trembling with rage. They won't stop. No matter what we do, they'll keep trying to destroy everything. John looked at the destroyed seedlings and then at her. Then we plant again, as many times as it takes. That same afternoon, they started replanting. The workers joined them, all in silence, each doing their part. It took hours, but when the sun set, the greenhouse was restored once more. Clara and John stayed last, finishing watering the last seedlings. They were dirt-covered, tired, but there was something satisfying in it. They had rebuilt together. Again. That's when it happened. Clara approached John to take the watering can, and the two stood very close. For a moment it seemed she might lean in more. John felt it, and instinctively he stepped back half a pace. "Ma'am," he started, voice low. "You don't even know who I really am." Clara looked him in the eye. "I know exactly who you are, John. More than you think." The silence grew heavy between them. John wanted to say something, but the words wouldn't come. That's when Derek, the youngest worker, appeared calling. "Mr. John, need to see a fence that broke." The moment shattered. John stepped away, grabbed his tools, and went to fix it. Clara stood there holding the watering can, feeling the frustration of a moment that almost was. The following days were awkward. The tension between them grew, but neither spoke of it. They worked together as always, but something unresolved hung in the air. Until one night, Clara was in the office reviewing documents when she found something. They were the old letters Mr. Harlan had written to her, kept in a drawer she hadn't opened yet. She started reading, and in one, her grandfather wrote about John. "John isn't just an employee. He's the soul of this land. When I'm gone, he'll keep caring for everything like it's his own, because in his heart it already is. I hope you recognize that when you arrive. I hope you see in him what I see. A man of his word, even when the word wasn't spoken aloud." Clara closed her eyes, holding the letter. Her grandfather had known. He had seen it all before it happened. She needed to do something. Something to show John he wasn't just a worker, that he never had been. The next day, Clara woke with a clear idea. She called the lawyers and asked them to prepare specific documents. It took a few days, but when it was ready, she called John to a meeting in the office. John arrived wary. "Something wrong?" Clara motioned for him to sit. He stayed standing. "Prefer to stand if you don't mind." Clara sighed but didn't push. She took a large envelope from the desk and held it out to him. "I want you to read this." John took the envelope slowly, like it might explode in his hands. He opened it and pulled out the papers. He started reading, and his expression changed. Confusion, surprise, disbelief. "This says that..." He stopped reading and looked at Clara. "Says I'm lifetime managing partner?" Clara nodded. "Official guardian of the Whitaker farm, with all the rights and responsibilities that entails." John shook his head. "I can't accept this." Clara stepped forward. "Why not?" John tossed the papers on the desk. "Because I didn't do anything to earn it. I just took care of the land. It was my job." Clara looked at him steadily. "You were never an employee, John. You were always the heart of this place. My grandfather knew it. I know it. And now it's on paper." John stood silent, processing. Clara continued. "You went hungry to support your nephew. You were humiliated, locked up, thrown out. And still you came back, not out of duty, not for money, but because this land is yours as much as mine, maybe more." John looked at the papers on the desk, then at Clara. "If I sign this, no turning back." Clara smiled faintly. "No turning back. You'll stay here with me, forever, caring for this land, building what Mr. Harlan dreamed." John picked up the papers again and read more slowly. He read every line, every word, as if making sure he wasn't dreaming. When he finished, he set the papers back on the desk, took the pen Clara offered, and signed. He said nothing, just signed and pushed the document back to her. Clara took the papers, put them in the envelope, and extended her hand. "Partners." John looked at the outstretched hand, then at her face, and finally shook it. "Partners." Days later, a new sign was installed at the farm's entrance. Clara insisted John be there when it happened. When the cloth covering the sign was pulled away, everyone could read, "Whitaker Farm, under the care of John Thorne." John stood staring at the sign. He didn't cry. But Clara saw his eyes were different. Lighter, as if a huge weight had been lifted from his shoulders. Miles approached and clapped John on the back. "Now we're talking, Mr. John. Now we're talking." The other workers applauded. John nodded in thanks, but he couldn't take his eyes off the sign. That afternoon, Clara and John walked through the fields they now managed together. The sun was low, painting everything gold. They stopped near the yellowwood sapling they had planted together weeks ago. It was already growing, sturdy and healthy. John looked at the tree and said, "You remember? Land doesn't lie, and it always knew we'd stay." Clara smiled. "I remember." They stood there in silence watching the sapling. They didn't hold hands. They didn't need to. Everything that needed saying had been said. Everything that needed building was being built, slowly, like roots that never stop growing. John remarked, looking at the horizon, "Now it really feels like home." Clara looked at him, then at the farm around them, and felt it too. For the first time since arriving, she felt she was home. Not because she had beaten the nephews, not because she inherited the land, but because beside her was someone who understood the value of that place the same way she did. The camera pulled back slowly, showing the two standing in the field, the farm stretching around them, alive and thriving. The yellowwood sapling beside them swayed gently in the wind, and in the distance, the sign at the entrance gleamed in the setting sun, with John's name etched forever on the land he never stopped loving. The months that followed brought a peace John hadn't known in years. The farm flourished under their joint management. The workers were motivated, production increased, and the place came alive again. But John still carried a quiet unease, something unresolved he couldn't name. Until one morning Clara called him to the office. "I have something for you." She opened the desk drawer and took out the pocket watch, the same one John had left with her when he thought he wouldn't return. "Now you can carry this in peace." John took the watch with both hands, feeling the weight of the object and all it represented. Mr. Harlan had held that watch, had given it to him on his deathbed, and now finally John could carry it without fear, without shame, without feeling he didn't deserve it. "Thank you," was all he could say. Clara nodded. "No need to thank. It was always yours." John put the watch in his shirt pocket, close to his heart, and left the office in silence. The following weeks were intense work. John and Clara were planning to expand the greenhouse, create new planting areas, implement the ideas Mr. Harlan had jotted in his journals. They worked together from dawn to dusk, and slowly, what was just mutual respect began to turn into something deeper. But neither forced it. There was no rush. The love growing between them was like the land they tended. It needed time, patience, careful hands. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't explosive. It was steady, constant, true. One afternoon, as they walked together along the main house porch, Clara stopped and looked out at the fields ahead. "John, do you think my grandfather knew all this would happen?" He thought for a moment before answering. "I think he had faith. Faith in the land. Faith in you. Faith in me. And sometimes that's all we need." Clara looked at him and smiled. It wasn't a sad smile or fully happy. It was the smile of someone who had finally found peace. John returned it with a light nod in his way without many words. They continued walking side by side. The fields around were green, full of life. The yellowwood sapling they had planted together wasn't so small anymore. It grew strong, with deep roots, just as Mr. Harlan said it would. John paused for a moment, looked at the tree, then at Clara. "You know what I realize? This land teaches us one thing, that what's true doesn't need to rush, just needs care." Clara agreed. "My grandfather used to say that. The best harvest is the one you plant without expecting quick returns." They stood there watching the sunset paint the sky orange and purple. They didn't hold hands. They didn't exchange love declarations. But they were together, and that was enough. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was full of understanding, respect, a bond built through pain, trust, and new beginnings. John looked at the horizon once more and said, almost whispering, "Now it really feels like home." Clara felt the words echo inside her. Yes, that was home. Not because it was perfect, but because it was real. Because it had been earned with sweat, tears, and honesty. The camera began to pull back slowly, showing the two standing on the porch, small against the vastness of the farm. The setting sun bathed everything in golden light. The greenhouse in the background, the repaired fences, the restored barns, all pulsed with life. And in that moment, it was no longer the Whitaker farm of the greedy nephews, no longer a place of pain and humiliation. It was the home of two hearts that learned belonging to a place doesn't come from papers or blood. It comes from care, from staying, from love that sprouts slowly, like roots that never stop growing.